Welcome to a special edition of Squatch Unlimited with me, Melissa, your host. And we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Meldrum. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
We're on the set of Skookum the Movie, and while he had a break, I decided I would ask him for a quick interview. And Dr. Meldrum, as you may not know, I have an associate or a research partner who has a very strong opinion about the Patterson Gimlin film. He believes that it's a hoax.
Okay.
And I have made it clear that I believe that it is probably authentic and probably, as far as I know, one of the only pieces of footage that has never been successfully scientifically debunked. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. In fact, it's interesting. It's kind of like the Energizer Bunny. Every time it's assailed by the critics, it seems to come back stronger and stronger and keep going and going.
Right. Well, one of the points that I like to bring up in favor of it being authentic is we're always going back to science to try to prove things with science. And one of the scientific studies I've seen is a video that measures the shin rise of the creature. Are you familiar with this video?
Yes, I've seen that analysis.
Okay. And I've been told that that particular video doesn't show anything terribly scientific, that anybody can affect their gait and create those differences. I know this is kind of your field of expertise, so could you shed some light on why the degree of shin rise is important?
Well, one of the pitfalls of a reductionist approach to the analysis of the film is that when you take individual aspects apart, then sure, you can argue rather convincingly for or against any particular feature. For example, as you point out, if I were to play devil's advocate, one explanation for that elevated shin rise would be the extended artificial feet of the costume would require you to lift your foot higher with each step, much like trying to walk across the beach wearing swim fins, only more exaggerated in that example. But when you consider it in concert with all of the other aspects, the limb proportions, the action of muscle groups, the dynamics and kinematics of the foot and the footprints associated with that film, then it's one piece of the puzzle that is absolutely integrated and correlated, functionally correlated with the overall manner of walking. So I think it's an important observation. It's obviously a very unnatural gait for a typical human, and so that should certainly point in a particular direction of investigation.
Right. Another point that I like to bring up in favor of its authenticity is the fact that several movie producers and creators of costumes have come forward and said that the effort to reproduce such a costume would be near to impossible, back at that date in '67, and then I've since learned that there's only one particular maker of the kind of fur that they use that even looks, close to an authentic looking fur. Any insights on that?
Well, sure. You get people on both sides of the argument, and my experience has been those that are very quick to dismiss this as simply a man in a fur suit are either ignorant of the history of costume design and fabrication in the film industry, or are simply pandering to a particular agenda of a director or production. I had to laugh one time when one such costume fabricator was depicted viewing the film and then just very cavalierly said, "Oh, that's obviously a man in a fursuit, and here's how we do it." And then they cut to an actor donning the various components of a costume, which included a spandex undergarment that had sculpted foam rubber armature to suggest muscle masses, and then a four-way stretch costume, which was equipped with gloves that were covered with excessively long hair, and so on. And then this was trotted out and depicted as if this was an easy explanation. Well, there wasn't spandex. There wasn't readily available foam rubber for that kind of an armature. There certainly wasn't four-way stretch fur. And even if there were, when this was all put together, it was so transparently a costume that my 5-year-old at home immediately said, "Daddy, that's a costume," So there are other individuals who are very versed and very knowledgeable of the history and the availability of the fabric. And I'm not familiar with the particular detail of the availability of that type of fur, but I know that there was not four-way stretch fur, there was fur cloth. And fur cloth, when the challenge of fur cloth is the lack of stretch means that you have to do a lot more tailoring. That means seams to hide. That means folds and wrinkles that are then dictated by the positions of those seams. And you end up with draping effects, with folds and wrinkles that have a very characteristic appearance that aren't replicated by organic skin and you know, subcutaneous adipose tissue, that superficial layer of fat. One of the studies that I'm involved with now in collaboration with Bill Munns, who is very informed on all those aspects of costume design and the history of those techniques in cinematography, involves examining those very types of features. And it's really enlightening when you examine candid shots of unclad models who aren't airbrushed and liposucked and artificially enhanced. The very features that many of the critics have pointed to in the film as being not observable on human bodies, in fact are. And each one of them can be identified and depicted from examples of these types of candid shots. And not only from human subjects, but I also was able to cull from published photographs images of great apes, showing many of those same features as well. I mean, just showing the consistency and similarity of our you know, shared morphology.
Very interesting. Another point of argument is that when the creature in the film walks, there is supposedly a flap near the ankle that comes up, and it's said to be the suit. Also, there's some sort of a bulge, which I think some scientists have analyzed it and said it's some sort of a hernia as a result of an injury on the leg. Any insights into that?
Well, yes, it was Doug Hychek, a producer from White Wolf Entertainment, who first drew attention to the interesting bulge in the quadriceps area on the lateral side of the thigh, and such a herniation. Well, let me back up. Beneath the skin and adipose on our lower extremities, we and other great apes have a very thick layer of connective tissue called it's the deep fascia. It's a connective tissue that encompasses the muscle compartments. And in the leg, it's exceptionally well developed, especially in upright bipedal organisms where the effects of gravity on the return of blood to the heart from those extremities is something of a challenge. It's like nature's elastic hose that creates some hydrostatic pressure there in the limb to help milk the blood back up through the venous system. That's kind of a technical explanation, but that elastic hose, or that deep fascia, the fascia lata, if it's injured and doesn't heal properly, will then allow the muscle to, when it contracts, to literally bulge through, to herniate.
So what you're saying is this is all a result of musculature and how it's formed. It's no chance that could be keys in a pocket under a suit.
Well, you know, that's an alternate interpretation, but it's curious that it is most prominent at precisely those points of the step cycle where the quadriceps would be contracting in order to extend the leg over, or extend the knee, rather, excuse me, extend the thigh over the knee. It was interesting. I had a student. I teach human anatomy for occupational and physical therapy students. And on occasion, I'll show the Patterson Gimlin film after we've discussed the determinants of gait. And I'll show the Patterson Gimlin film and ask them to evaluate this individual and notice any distinctions from a typical human gait, from the parameters that we've discussed. And I pointed out this herniation at one point. And one of my students excitedly raised her hand. She had had an injury where she fell off a horse and landed in some brush and had a large puncture wound, laceration wound on her thigh, and the fascia lata had never properly healed. She said, you know, put your hand right there, and as she extended her knee, a ping pong ball sized bulge protruded through the deep fascia underneath her skin, half circle, half hemisphere. Very similar, remarkably similar to the depiction. So You know, there are other possible explanations. These types of herniations can sometimes arise as a result of disease state. Like in tuberculosis, some of the connective tissue can deteriorate and result in herniations in various places. You know, and so there has been attention drawn to some of her other areas of her thigh that have some bulges and undulations that could also have been the result of a more systemic degradation of this connective tissue and multiple herniations. Now your comment about the flap around the ankle, I've actually never heard that one. I've heard a lot of discussion about the supposed flap hanging in her buttock region, whether it's something clinging to her backside or whether it's a fold of a costume. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter, it's her right hand, or left hand, excuse me. It's her left hand on the most posterior swing that's creating a shadow. You know, so when you have to look at these criticisms very carefully, because sometimes they're as misguided as that, as misinterpreting a very normal aspect of the anatomy by looking at a single isolated frame without considering its context and understanding the actual movements.
Interesting. Another point of argument for it being a hoax is Hieronymus's claim on national television, passing a lie detector test, saying that he was in the suit.
Right.
And then he's also done a demonstration of his walk that's similar, you know, to the creature's walk. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that?
Well, there's a reason that lie detector tests are not allowed as evidence in litigations. They are not entirely reliable, and people are able to fool them. So I would not choose his ability to pass a lie detector test over all of the very objective and obvious evidence that has accumulated from examination of the film itself. Hieronymus's claims have been inconsistent and contradictory with those of other claimants that he's even associated himself with, such as Philip Morris, who described a costume that was just diametrically opposite of what Hieronymus was describing, which, you know, he describes a green horsehide costume that was so difficult to get on it required assistance, and he described a two-piece, so you had, like, you know, pajamas, pull-over top that then hung over a pair of pants, and he described, you know, feet that he likened to those big floppy slippers you get at Kmart, in his own words, and that the head was formed of a helmet, football helmet, that had a artificial face and head built up around it. Now imagine this: Hieronymus has one good eye. He claims he took one of his spare glass eyes and it was used on the fabrication of the costume in order to catch the sunlight to give that natural looking glint. So here you have a one-eyed person who is looking through, in his own words, a small opening that's a full 2 inches from his eye, he claimed. So imagine taking an empty toilet tube roll, an empty toilet paper roll, that is, holding it up to your eye, and then marching across in an awkward suit, a stiff suit, a green horsehide suit, with Kmart slippers on your feet, and not tripping over the debris that's scattered across that sandbar, never looking at the ground. It begins to beg credulity when you start to line up all of the details of these claimants. And so I would much rather, those can be dealt with, but I think it's the first priority is to deal with the film itself. It's what it depicts, and so we look at the anatomy, we look at the kinematics, we look at, in my case, at the footprints that are associated with that side, and the correlated kinematics of the foot itself. I've made placed a lot of significance on an inferred model of function for the Sasquatch foot, which involves a great deal of flexibility in a very flat foot, the so-called mid-tarsal break. Now, the term break is a misfortune or an unfortunate term, because I think it conjures an inaccurate impression in the minds of people who don't understand the history of that term. They think it's some dysfunction, some disability. It's not. It's just the break indicates a marked degree of flexion across the instep, where in contrast to the human foot that has a very rigid longitudinal arch. So the interesting thing is that the kinematics of that action can be seen very, very clearly. There are points in which the heel segment is in a nearly vertical posture. If that was a stiff artificial foot, or even something attached to a human foot with a rigid longitudinal arch, the forefoot, 6 to 8 inches of the forefoot would have to be sticking vertically, directly down into the ground with each step, which is ridiculous to even suggest. Plus the footprints show the artifacts of that mid-tarsal flexibility in the form of a very distinctive pressure ridge, which has been, you know, overlooked or misinterpreted for many, many years. So when you take all that into account, you know, I tell people on the basis of the feet, the footprints alone, I'm convinced that that's an authentic piece of film footage. When you add all the rest that goes with it, you know, it's an overwhelmingly convincing case, I believe.
All right. Well, on our website, we feature a hangout called Real or Not Real, and we do very much what we've done right here. We discuss a piece of footage, and at the end, we all cast a vote. And so I'm going to ask you to cast your vote now for the Patterson Gimlin film. Would you consider it to be real or not real?
I would certainly consider it to be real, and I'd be happy to vote to that effect on your website.
And there we have it. The man himself has declared that it's most likely authentic. Thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Pleasure. Thanks.
Yes.